The breaking point. The warm scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, blending with the soft aroma of vanilla candles. Emma sat by the window, cradling a half-empty mug between her hands, though the warmth did little to soothe the cold ache inside her chest. The city outside was alive, distant sirens, the murmur of people passing below, the occasional honk of impatient drivers, but inside her small apartment, silence reigned. She had grown used to the emptiness. 2 months had passed since Leo walked out, leaving behind nothing but echoes of their love and the ghost of a future they had once planned together. The bed upstairs remained untouched. She had taken to sleeping on the couch, the creases in the cushions a testament to restless nights filled with unanswered questions. It had started subtly, the unraveling of their marriage. A forgotten good morning here, an unspoken I love you there. Conversations had become shorter, replaced by sighs and unspoken resentments. She had tried to ignore it, had told herself that every marriage had its rough patches. But deep down, she had known the truth. Leo was slipping away. The final argument had been a storm neither of them had seen coming, though, in hindsight, Emma wondered if she had sensed it all along. "This isn't working," Leo had said, his voice tight, his eyes dark with frustration. "We're just stuck, Emma. This isn't the life I wanted." Emma had stood frozen, her hands gripping the back of the chair as if letting go would make everything fall apart even faster. "What do you mean, this isn't what you wanted?" Her voice had been steady, but inside, she was already breaking. Leo had let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his dark hair. "You know exactly what I mean." And she had. She knew what he was referring to. The failed fertility treatments, the heartbreak of negative pregnancy tests, the quiet grief that had settled between them like an invisible wall. Leo had always wanted children. It had been the one dream he clung to, the future he had imagined for them. But life had been cruel, and no matter how much they tried, no matter how many doctors they saw, the answer had always been the same. Emma couldn't have children. For years, she had tried to push away the pain, to convince herself that their love was enough, that they could still build a beautiful life together. But Leo had wanted more. And when the reality of that more became impossible, he had pulled away. "It's not just about the baby, Emma," he had continued, pacing the room like a man caged by his own regrets. "It's about us. We're not happy anymore. I don't even know who we are." Emma had felt the sting of his words like a slap. "So, what, you're just going to leave? Walk away from everything we built?" Leo had clenched his jaw, looking anywhere but at her. "I don't know how to stay." That had been the moment she realized she had already lost him. Not just that night, but long before. He had been slipping through her fingers for months, maybe even years, and she had been too scared to admit it. The sound of a suitcase zipping shut had echoed through the apartment like a final goodbye. He hadn't begged her to stop him. She hadn't asked him to stay. And just like that, he was gone. The first few days after his departure had been unbearable. Emma had spent hours staring at her phone, waiting for a message that never came. Her heart had clutched at every notification, every unknown number, hoping, desperately, that it would be him. But Leo had disappeared from her life, as if their years together had meant nothing. Their home had become a graveyard of memories. She had walked through the quiet rooms, running her fingers over the dust-covered photographs, the old sweaters he had left behind, the coffee mugs they had once shared lazy Sunday mornings with. Everything carried his presence, yet he was nowhere to be found. Friends had tried to comfort her. They had sent texts, brought over food she couldn't eat, whispered words of encouragement she couldn't believe. "He just needs time," they had said. "Maybe he'll realize he made a mistake." But Emma wasn't sure she wanted him to come back. Because what if he did? What if he returned, but only out of guilt? Out of obligation? Would that be enough? The days blurred into nights, the ache in her chest never fully fading. She had stopped sleeping in their bedroom. The bed felt too big, too empty. Instead, She found solace in the living room, curling up on the couch with a blanket wrapped tightly around her, as if it could hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. One night, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. She looked different. Her once vibrant green eyes were dull, rimmed with exhaustion. The softness of her face had been replaced by sharp edges, the weight of sorrow etched into every feature. Who was she without Leo? For so long their lives had been intertwined. Their dreams, their routines, their love. Now she was just Emma, alone. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had spent so much time mourning the life she lost that she had forgotten she still had one to live. She couldn't keep waiting for him to come back. She had to move forward. Somehow. It started with small steps. She cleaned the apartment, throwing away old clothes, packing up the framed photos that once lined their walls. She stopped checking her phone, stopped replaying their last conversation in her head like a broken record. Then she found a job. It wasn't what she had planned for herself, working as a waitress at a small cafe. But it gave her purpose. It gave her something to wake up for. And for the first time in months, she felt the tiniest sliver of hope. Maybe she would be okay. Maybe she didn't need Leo to find happiness again. But fate had a cruel way of rewriting stories. Because just as she was learning to live without him, she discovered she was pregnant. A life she never expected. Emma sat frozen on the cold bathroom floor, her trembling hands clutching the pregnancy test. The two pink lines stared back at her, undeniable and unchangeable. Pregnant. Her breath hitched. Her vision blurred. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. She felt a sudden wave of nausea, not just from the pregnancy, but from the sheer weight of the moment. The test nearly slipped from her fingers as she pressed a hand to her stomach, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Leo had left. He had walked out believing she was barren. He had given up on their marriage, on her, convinced that she would never carry his child. And now, just when she had finally accepted that she would never be a mother, life had other plans. For what felt like an eternity, Emma sat there in silence, her mind racing through a million tangled thoughts. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Some twisted irony from the universe? Or was it fate? She thought back to all the years she had spent yearning for this. The night she had cried into her pillow after yet another negative test. The countless doctor's visits, the medical opinions, the hopelessness that had seeped into every crevice of her marriage. And now, when she had nothing left, she had been given everything. A small sob escaped her lips as she leaned against the bathroom wall, her free hand gripping the fabric of her shirt over her stomach. A life was growing inside her, a life she had thought was impossible. Tears blurred her vision, but they weren't just tears of sadness. There was something else there, something fragile and terrifying. Hope. The next few days passed in a daze. Emma found herself in a haze of emotions, swinging between disbelief and overwhelming fear. She had barely processed what this meant, what any of it meant. Could she do this alone? Did she even have a choice? Telling Leo wasn't an option. No, he had made his decision. He had walked away, leaving her to pick up the pieces of the life they had built together. He didn't get to come back, just because fate had decided to play a trick on them. She would raise this baby on her own. Her shifts at the cafe became a strange kind of therapy. She had started working there only a month ago, hoping it would give her something. Anything to hold on to after Lee left. The days were long, the customers impatient, and the pay was far from great, but it kept her mind occupied. Now, though, everything felt different. She moved through her shifts in a fog, her mind constantly returning to the life growing inside her. Every time she touched her stomach, she wondered if it was real, if the tiny heartbeat she couldn't yet hear was strong and steady. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not her friends, not her coworkers, not even herself, at least, not fully. She was still trying to accept that the impossible had happened. But despite the chaos in her mind, A quiet determination was beginning to take root inside her. She would do this. She could do this. And she would never let her child feel like they weren't wanted. Then came the night that changed everything. It had been a long, exhausting shift. The cafe was unusually packed for a Tuesday, and Emma had barely had time to breathe between tables. By the time the dinner rush began to slow down, her feet ached, and her body begged for rest. She had just finished refilling the napkin dispensers when the doorbell chimed, signaling another customer. Emma barely glanced up. "Welcome in," she called over her shoulder, her voice laced with exhaustion. Then she heard his voice. "Table for two, please." Her heart stopped. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. Slowly, as if moving through a dream, she turned around. And there he was. Leo, sitting across from another woman, smiling, laughing, living a life without her. Emma felt the ground sway beneath her. Her fingers tightened around the napkin dispenser, steadying herself as nausea threatened to rise in her throat. It wasn't just that he had moved on. It was that he looked happy. As if the life they had built together meant nothing. As if she meant nothing. And worst of all, he had no idea. No idea that the wife he had left behind was carrying his child. No idea that the future he had walked away from was sitting only a few feet away from him. Emma's hands shook, but she forced herself to move. One step, then another, until she was standing right beside his table. She watched as he looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. His mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came out. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat and steadied her voice. "What can I get you?" she asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, finally, Leo spoke. "Emma." The way he said her name, like a question, like an apology, like a ghost he had never expected to see again, sent a sharp pain through her chest. She didn't blink, didn't break, because this was her moment. For the first time since he had walked out that door, she held the power. And he had no idea what was coming next. The weight of the past. Silence stretched between them. Emma stood still, gripping the small notepad she always carried during shifts. Her knuckles were white, her breath shallow, her heartbeat an unbearable drum against her ribs. Leo, the man who had once promised her forever, sat before her like a stranger. And across from him, the woman, his new girlfriend, tossed her sleek hair over her shoulder, oblivious to the storm brewing between them. The cafe felt suddenly too small, too loud. The clinking of cutlery, the hum of conversation, the distant hiss of the coffee machine. It all blurred into static as Leo's shocked gaze locked onto hers. "Emma." His voice cracked. She forced her lips into a polite, impersonal smile. "What can I get you?" She saw it then. The way his throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his fingers curling slightly on the tabletop. For a second, something flashed in his eyes. Guilt? Regret? She didn't care. Or at least, that's what she told herself. His girlfriend, unaware of the history that had just crashed into their cozy dinner, glanced between them, her brows knitting together. "Vave. Who is this?" Emma didn't look away, didn't give Leo the time to recover. "Oh, he knows who I am." Her voice was calm, steady, laced with the quiet steel she had never possessed before. "I'm his wife." The woman's smile faltered. "What?" Leo exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. "Emma. Save it." Emma's hand tightened around her notepad, her nails pressing into the paper. She hadn't planned this moment, hadn't rehearsed the words she might say if she ever saw him again. But suddenly, all of the nights she had spent crying, all of the mornings waking up to an empty bed, all of the pain she had carried alone, it all burned inside her, and she was done being the one who hurt. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You left me, Leo." His girlfriend's mouth dropped open, eyes wide in horror. Emma ignored her. "You left me, believing I couldn't give you the one thing you wanted most. And now here you are." Her lips curled slightly. "Living your best life while I—" She let the sentence hang in the air, the weight of what she wasn't saying suffocating. Leo's eyes flickered down to her stomach. His breath hitched. She saw the pieces clicking together in his mind. The hesitation, the fear. And that's when she knew. He knew. Leo's fingers curled into fists against the table, his face paling. Emma could see it, the sheer, raw shock in his expression, the realization settling deep in his bones. "Emma." His voice was barely a whisper now, but she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She straightened, lifting her chin, and turned toward his girlfriend. "You wanted to order." The woman blinked, clearly still struggling to process what had just been revealed. She turned to Leo, waiting for an explanation. But for once, Leo had no words. Emma let the silence stretch between them before exhaling softly. "I'll give you a few minutes." Then, without another glance at Leo, she walked away. She could feel his stare burning into her back. But she didn't turn around. Not this time. She somehow made it through the rest of her shift, though her hand shook every time she carried a tray. The cafe bustled as usual, and no one, not her coworkers, not her customers, had any idea that her entire world had just tilted off its axis. As she clocked out for the night, exhaustion settled in her bones. She had told herself she wouldn't let Leo get to her. She had told herself that she would be strong. But as soon as she stepped outside, the cold night air wrapping around her like a cruel embrace, her facade cracked. Her breath hitched. She pressed a hand against her stomach, her other hand covering her mouth as a choked sob forced its way out. She thought she had been prepared. She had been wrong. Emma. Her entire body tensed. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to cry again, not to let him see how much this had broken her. But when she finally turned, her resolve wavered. Leo stood in front of her, his face a battlefield of emotions. "Is it true?" His voice was hoarse. Emma exhaled sharply. "Go back inside, Leo. Your girlfriend is waiting." He ignored that. "Emma, please, just tell me. Is it true?" Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. "Why do you care?" His jaw clenched. "You know why." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Do I?" "Because last I checked, you decided I wasn't enough for you. You walked away. You left me thinking I was broken, Leo." His face twisted, guilt flooding his expression. "I never thought that." "But you did." The weight of her words hung heavy between them. Leo took a shaky breath. "Emma, I need to know. Is that baby mine?" She lifted her chin. "It doesn't matter." He flinched. "Of course, it matters." Emma let out a sharp, hollow laugh. "Why?" "Because now that you know, you suddenly care." She shook her head. "You lost the right to ask me anything when you walked away." Leo ran a hand down his face. "Emma, I was scared." Her stomach twisted. Scared. That was his excuse. She had been terrified for years. Terrified that she would never be enough. Terrified that she would never be able to carry a child. Terrified that she would lose him. And in the end, she had lost him anyway. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "You don't get to be scared now, Leo." He took a step forward. "Emma, She stepped back. Because the truth was, despite the pain, despite everything, a small, foolish part of her still wanted to reach for him. But she wouldn't. Not again. She pressed a hand against her stomach, her voice quiet but firm. "This baby is mine. I will love them enough for both of us." Leo's breath caught. Emma took a deep breath, the cold night air filling her lungs. "Go home, Leo." And this time, she was the one who walked away. A love left behind. The night was quiet, save for the soft rustling of wind through the city streets. Emma walked with steady but heavy steps, her breath visible in the chilly air. Each inhale felt sharp, each exhale laced with an exhaustion that went deeper than her bones. She had left Leo standing there, his expression carved with something she wasn't sure she wanted to name: regret, shock, desperation. It didn't matter. She had meant what she said. This baby is mine. Still, as she reached her small apartment and unlocked the door, the weight of the night collapsed onto her shoulders. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, she let out a trembling breath, pressing her back against the wood. Her hands instinctively cradled her stomach. "It's just us now," she whispered. A soft kick fluttered against her palm. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had already cried too much over a man who had once sworn to love her, but had abandoned her when she needed him most. And yet, despite everything, despite the fact that he had a new life now, a new girlfriend, a world that didn't include her, a small part of her had still wanted him to fight for her, to fight for them. But he hadn't, and that hurt more than anything. The next morning, Emma forced herself out of bed. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale golden hue through the thin curtains of her tiny bedroom. She sat up slowly, her hands instinctively resting on her growing belly. No matter how much last night had shaken her, she had responsibilities, bills to pay, a baby to prepare for, and she refused to let Leo's reappearance throw her back into the depths of heartbreak. She got dressed, pulling on her uniform, tying her apron around her waist. The cafe would be busy today, and she needed the distraction. As she stepped outside, the crisp air woke her up fully, reminding her that the world kept moving. And so would she. The cafe was already bustling when she arrived. She greeted her coworkers with a forced smile, diving into her tasks without giving herself time to dwell on the previous night. She poured coffee, cleared tables, smiled at customers. For a while, it worked. The rhythm of the job helped push everything to the back of her mind. But then, halfway through her shift, he walked in. Leo. Emma's hands froze mid-wipe over a table, her breath catching in her throat. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he had been running his fingers through it restlessly. His usual confidence, his effortless charm, was absent. Instead, he looked haunted. She braced herself. He walked toward the counter where she stood, his gaze locked on hers. Her coworker, a young woman named Lily, glanced between them before giving Emma a curious look. "Do you want me to take this one?" Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "No, I've got it." She stepped forward. "Be strong. What can I get you?" Leo exhaled, his hands pressing against the counter. "Emma, we need to talk." She forced a polite, empty smile. "This is a workplace, Leo. If you'd like a coffee, I can get you one. Otherwise, you should go." His jaw clenched. "I'm not leaving until we talk." Emma glanced around, noting the curious stares from a few customers. She hated this, hated being watched. With a deep breath, she untied her apron. 5 minutes. Outside. They stood in the alleyway behind the cafe, where the scent of roasted coffee beans mixed with the cool morning air. Emma crossed her arms, standing firm. "Say whatever you need to say, then leave." Leo ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "You think I can just walk away after last night?" Emma's eyes narrowed. "You did it before." His head dropped slightly, as if her words had physically struck him. "I was an idiot." Emma let out a hollow laugh. "That's an understatement." Leo lifted his gaze, desperation flickering behind his stormy eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing, Emma. I thought I was freeing you. You have no idea what it did to me to see you break every time another doctor told us no, every time another test came back negative. I couldn't stand watching you suffer." Emma's throat tightened. "So instead of staying, instead of supporting me, you left. That's your excuse." Leo's hands balled into fists. "I was scared, okay. I thought I was sparing us both more pain." Emma scoffed. "You spared yourself, not me." Leo inhaled sharply. "And now, After all of that, after everything, you're pregnant. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Emma lifted her chin. Yes. Leo let out a shaky breath. And it's mine, isn't it? Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Leo's eyes shut tightly, as if he was trying to process the impossible. When he opened them again, his entire expression had changed. I want to be in the baby's life. Emma took a step back. You don't get to decide that now. Leo's voice dropped, softer now. Emma, please. I made mistakes, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Her breath caught. There it was, the thing she had once longed to hear. But it was too late. Emma's hand gently rested over her stomach, where new life grew, a life that had taught her she was stronger than she ever believed. She swallowed hard before speaking. Leo, I don't know if us exists anymore. His face crumbled, but he didn't argue. For a long moment, they stood there, the weight of years between them. Then Emma took a deep breath. If you truly want to be in this child's life, prove it. But don't expect me to just forget everything. Leo nodded slowly, as if accepting the challenge. I will. I swear I will. Emma turned, heading back inside. And for the first time in months, she felt something different. Not pain, not anger, just the quiet whisper of a new beginning. The weight of redemption. Emma walked back into the cafe, her heartbeat still unsteady from her conversation with Leo. As she tied her apron back on and stepped behind the counter, her coworker Lily shot her a questioning glance. You okay? Emma forced a small nod. Yeah, just an unexpected conversation. Lily didn't pry, but she gave Emma a knowing look before turning back to the espresso machine. The rest of Emma's shift passed in a blur. Even as she took orders and served coffee, her mind was elsewhere. Leo's words echoed in her head. I want to be in the baby's life. Could she trust him? Did she even want to trust him? That was the problem. A part of her still wanted to believe in the man she had once loved. But another part, the stronger part, remembered what it felt like to be left alone, to be abandoned in the middle of her worst heartbreak. She had survived without him. She wasn't sure she needed him now. That evening, after her shift, she sat in her small apartment, sipping a cup of warm tea while rubbing slow circles over her belly. What do you think, little one? She whispered. Would it be a mistake to let him in? Another soft kick. She smiled faintly. Maybe the baby wasn't answering, but Emma knew what her heart was telling her. She needed to be careful, but she also needed to be fair. If Leo truly wanted to be a father, he had to prove it, not just with words, but with actions. And she wouldn't make it easy. Leo's struggle. Leo sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. His fingers hovered over Emma's name in his contacts, but he hesitated. What could he say? He had spent months convincing himself that leaving had been the right choice, that Emma deserved better than a man who couldn't give her the family she desperately wanted. And now he had found out she was carrying his child. It should have been a moment of joy. It should have been something they celebrated together. But instead, it was tangled in pain, in resentment, in all the mistakes he had made. He exhaled sharply, gripping the back of his neck. His girlfriend, Vanessa, had left his apartment earlier, furious. You're really running back to your ex-wife just because she's pregnant. She had snapped. Leo had said nothing, because deep down, he knew the answer. It wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was about Emma. It had always been about Emma. And maybe he had been lying to himself all this time. The first step. 3 days passed before Leo finally gathered the courage to reach out. He didn't call. He knew Emma wouldn't answer. Instead, he showed up at her apartment. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, but not entirely shocked. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. What do you want, Leo? He swallowed, his hands in his pockets. To talk, just for a minute. Emma studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Fine. but make it quick." She stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was small but cozy. A warm lamp glowed in the corner, and a few baby books were stacked neatly on the coffee table. Leo's chest tightened. This was real. Emma was building a life, one that he had no part in. Yet, he turned to face her, his voice quieter now. "I meant what I said. I want to be here. I want to be involved." Emma exhaled. Leo, wanting to be involved and actually being involved are two different things. He nodded. "I know. That's why I'm asking you, to let me prove it." She hesitated, then asked the one question he wasn't prepared for. "Why now?" Leo's breath caught. Why now? Because he had seen her, standing there with his child growing inside her, and realized what he had lost. Because he had spent nights staring at the ceiling, regretting every step that had led him away from her. Because the moment he had seen her carrying their child, something had shifted inside him. Something raw, something undeniable. Yes, but he knew those words weren't enough. So instead, he said, "Because I made a mistake leaving you, and I don't want to make another one by staying away." Emma studied him, searching his face for sincerity. After a long pause, she sighed. "You want to be involved. Fine, but you're going to have to show up, Leo. No disappearing. No excuses." Leo nodded immediately. "I will. I swear." Emma held up a hand. "Not just for me, for the baby. If you're in, you're in. No half measures." Leo's heart pounded. This was his chance. His only chance. "I'm all in." Emma held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. "Then we'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it was something. And for the first time in months, Leo felt like he had a reason to fight, proving his place. The weeks that followed were a test of patience, a test of trust, and a test of Leo's resolve. Emma hadn't given him a clear answer that day in her apartment, but she had given him an opportunity, and he wasn't going to waste it. He started small. At first it was just texts, checking in, asking about doctor's appointments, making sure she was eating well. Then it became more. Showing up to every prenatal visit, even when Emma didn't invite him, bringing her groceries when she was too tired to go shopping, offering to fix the leaky kitchen faucet in her apartment because she didn't have time to call a plumber. Emma watched him with quiet skepticism at first, waiting for him to disappear, to go back to the man who had walked away when things got too hard. But he didn't. He stayed, every single time, breaking the walls. One afternoon, they sat in the doctor's office, waiting for the ultrasound technician to come in. Emma shifted uncomfortably on the chair, adjusting the waistband of her maternity leggings. Leo sat beside her, bouncing his knee, hands clasped together. It had been weeks of tentative progress, of quiet moments that hovered between the past and the uncertain future. But this moment felt different. Real. The door opened, and the technician smiled. "Ready to see your baby." Emma lay back, pulling up her shirt so the cool gel could be spread over her belly. Leo's breath caught as the image flickered to life on the screen. And then there it was. A tiny, undeniable miracle. His child. Their child. The rhythmic sound of the heartbeat filled the room, steady and strong. Emma smiled, blinking back tears. Leo swallowed hard, gripping the armrest of his chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He had spent months running from this, from her. But in this moment, watching his child move inside Emma's belly, he knew he would never run again. When the technician printed the image and handed it to Emma, she studied it for a long time before silently passing it to Leo. It was the first time she had willingly let him hold a piece of their future. He didn't say anything. He just held it, as if it were the most precious thing in the world, a step toward something more. As they left the clinic, Leo walked Emma to her car. The air between them was different, softer, more hopeful. Emma hesitated before opening the car door, looking up at him. You've been showing up." Leo nodded. "I told you I would." She exhaled, wrapping her arms around herself. "It doesn't erase the past." "I know." She hesitated again. "But maybe it's a start." Leo's chest tightened. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. A door cracked open, just enough for him to prove that he could be the man she and their child deserved. And that was all he needed. 9 months later, Leo paced outside the delivery room, his hands in his hair, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He could hear Emma's cries, the urgent voices of the doctors, the beeping of machines. And he was powerless. The last 9 months had been a slow, careful rebuilding. They weren't together, but they were something. Something undefined. Something fragile. Something that mattered more than anything. And now, as she brought their child into the world, Leo had never felt more helpless in his life. Then, a cry. A wail so sharp and beautiful that it cut through every ounce of doubt inside him. Leo sank into a chair, pressing his hands to his face. His child was here. His family was here. Minutes later, a nurse stepped out, smiling. "It's a boy. Healthy, strong. Emma is asking for you." Leo's legs barely worked as he followed her inside. Emma looked exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, but she was glowing. And in her arms, a tiny, perfect little boy wrapped in a blue blanket. Leo's breath hitched. "He's beautiful." Emma looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long moment, she held out their son. "Do you want to hold him?" Leo's heart nearly stopped. Carefully, almost reverently, he took his son into his arms. He was so small, so impossibly small, but the weight of him was heavier than anything Leo had ever carried. Tears burned in his eyes as he cradled the baby against his chest. "I'll never leave you," he whispered. Emma watched him, her own eyes glassy with emotion. And in that moment, something between them shifted. Maybe it wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness. But it was trust. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't broken anymore. They were something new. Something whole. Something worth fighting for.